Sub-Commander Teshuk had classified 19,000 contacts in his career, and not one of them had ever made him look twice. The ship on his screen was making him look twice. It sat 200 kilometers off the crest's forward arc, dead in the water, running lights low. No shield bloom, no weapons signature worth logging. Its hull was the color of a thing that had been repaired too many times by too many different hands, gray over a darker gray plates that did not match seams. A Vharn foreman would have been executed for. To Teshuk's eye, it looked less like a warship than like something that had been dragged out of a scrapyard and pointed roughly at the stars. He said as much aloud for the log: low signal contact, non-standard construction, classify as debris, disregard. The deck around him agreed the way a deck agrees with a senior officer, which is to say it did not disagree. High, Marshal Oskvar, standing at the center rail with his hands folded behind him, made the sound the Vharn made, instead of laughing a short click deep in the throat. They are waiting for a shuttle. Oskvar said, "Do you see it? A medical transport. Inbound. They will not even lift their guns until their little boat is aboard." Someone on the deck clicked too. Teshuk did not click. He was watching the gray ship do nothing, and the nothing was the wrong shape. He had seen frightened ships. A frightened ship leaks. It vents drive plasma. It does not need to vent. It paints you with its targeting array to feel less alone. It chatters on open channels, asking who you are and what you want. And please, please. This ship did none of that. It held station. It kept its lights low. It waited for its shuttle, with the flat patience of a creature that has already decided how the next hour is going to go, and is simply letting you find out at your own speed. The shuttle was still 4 minutes out. Far away, on a station, the Vharn had struck one rotation earlier. A man named Tomas Vela had spent the last good morning of his life doing something very small. He was 51 years old. He had a daughter named Aina, who was waiting for him on a colony, 3 jumps away, and a habit of writing her name on the top of every duty roster, the way some men touch a doorframe on the way out. He had built the clinic on Meridian Station, with money he did not have and hands that were not trained for it, and over 11 years, he had made it into the kind of place where people who could not pay were treated anyway, and told to stop, apologizing. On the morning the crest arrived, Dr. Vela had been arguing with a supply clerk about the price of clean water, and losing and enjoying it. The shuttle, inbound to the gray ship, was his crew was aboard it. He was not. Teshuk did not know any of this. It was not in his records. Almost nothing about the humans was in his records, and the little that was the ascendancy had marked, restricted, and buried under a warning the elders no longer bothered to read. Elder Voska had read it. That was the trouble with Voska. She came onto the command deck, the way the old always came onto the decks of the young, slowly, and as if she had somewhere better to be. She had served in the war that the Vharn no longer named, and she had come back from it quieter than she left. When she looked at the gray ship on the screen, she did not click. "Turn us around, Marshal," she said. Oskvar did not turn his head. "The station is taken. The lane is ours. The last thing on it is a scrapyard hull, waiting for a hospital boat." "I know what it looks like," Voska said. "I am telling you, it looks like that on purpose." The deck clicked at her. It was not cruel exactly. It was the sound. A strong thing makes it a weak one. A reflex. A way of closing ranks. Voska stood in the middle of it, with her hands loose at her sides, and let it wash over her. And when it faded, she said only, "You will remember that I asked." And she turned and left. And every officer on the deck felt a little better once she was gone, the way you feel better when a draft stops. Teshuk watched her go. Then he watched the gray ship again. He wanted very badly for her to be a frightened old woman. He kept the thought where no one could log it. On the gray ship whose name the Vharn had not asked, and would not learn until it was far too late to matter, Captain Miriam Okonkwo sat in a chair that was older than the Ascendancy's current dynasty, and watched the crest fill her forward window. She was not a large woman. She had a way of holding still that made the people around her hold still too. Her ship was called the Patience, and she had chosen the name herself, and she had meant it as a promise rather than a joke, though she was aware it could be taken either way. Her communications officer looked back at her. "Meridian's gone, Captain." "Confirmed." The station, the clinic, all of it. Okonkwo was quiet, for the length of one breath. Then she said, "Start the clock." It was a phrase her crew knew, on the Patience, when a thing was set in motion that could not now be stopped. Someone started a clock, an actual clock, an old mechanical one, bolted to the wall of the bridge that a chief engineer 3 captains ago had brought up from a farmhouse on Earth. It ticked, in a ship that whispered everywhere else. The clock was the one loud thing, and every soul aboard had learned to work to the sound of it. Okonkwo reached up and started it herself. Then she opened a channel, a wide one, unencrypted, the kind you use when you want to be heard rather than understood, and she began to read. Not a threat, not a demand. Alist. She read a name, and paused, and read another name, and paused, and read a third. The names were human and strange to Vharn, ears soft in the middle and hard at the edges, and they came at a slow and even pace, one after another, and each one was followed by a small deliberate silence, as if room were being left for someone to answer who could not. On the Crest's deck, a junior sensor officer frowned at her board. "Subcommander, the human vessel is transmitting. She stopped, listened, tried again. "It's a count, sir. Something's counting. The number keeps going up." Teshuk crossed to her station. He listened. A voice, calm, female, reading what his translator rendered as a rising sequence, one term, and then another, climbing steadily, no end in sight. Behind it faint, a mechanical sound. He could not place a slow, hard tick-tick-tick patient as a dripping tap. His skin drew tight along his spine. "A weapon," said the junior officer, because it was the only shape she had for it. "It's charging something, a countdown running backward." "Sir, if that number is a charge cycle, I don't know what it is," Teshuk said, and he was careful to say it flatly, because the deck was listening, and Oskvar was listening, and somewhere behind his eyes, Elder Voska was still walking slowly away. Loit, priority. He looked back at the main screen at the gray, unimpressive ship holding its patient station at the medical shuttle. Now 3 minutes out at the low running lights that had not so much as flickered, while an old woman begged the deck to turn around. The number climbed, the clock ticked, and the thing the Vharn had called scrap and logged as debris and told itself to disregard went on waiting for its shuttle with the unhurried calm of a species that had already decided and was only letting the ascendancy find out at its own speed. The shuttle came aboard the Patience at 2 minutes and 40 seconds, and the humans did not fire. That was the first thing that was wrong, and Teshuk knew it was wrong the moment it happened, though it took him some time to understand why. The medical boat crossed the last stretch of open space between the two ships docked sealed, and the gray hull swallowed it, and still the low running lights did not change, and still the guns did not lift. A cornered animal that has finally gotten the one thing it was waiting for will move. It will run, or it will turn, and bare its teeth, having no more reason to stall. The Patience did neither. It had its shuttle, and it went on holding station as though the shuttle had never been the point at all, as though the humans had simply been passing the time with something small and necessary, while the larger business arranged itself. Oskvar was pleased. Teshuk could see it in the set of the marshal's shoulders. To Oskvar, the docked shuttle confirmed the whole reading of the enemy. A soft people who cared more for a boatload of medics than for the tactical suicide of holding still in front of a Vharn kingship. Weak, sentimental, scrap, and sentiment holding hands 200 kilometers off the bow. "Bring us about," Oskvar said. "We will finish the lane and go home. Sub-commander, sweep the field for salvage. Then burn what floats." "Yes, Marshal." Teshuk turned back to his board to order the sweep, and that was when he saw the field, really saw it, for the first time. He had been watching one ship. He should have been watching the space around it. The Crest's passive sensors had over the last hour dutifully logged every low signal return in the volume, and per standing order sorted each one into the bin-marked debris and stopped thinking about it. Teshuk called the raw returns up now. All of them, the whole cloud, and the deck lighting dimmed as the plot expanded to hold it. Contacts, cold, quiet, non-standard, mismatched, each one individually, beneath notice. He counted them the old way by hand, dragging one claw down the column of the display, because he did not trust the automated tally. 40 low returns, holding station in a loose shell around the crest, at ranges that had crept inward patiently, while every eye on the deck was fixed on the one gray ship in front. Not a formation. Formations announced themselves. This was the opposite of a formation. This was 40 things arranged so specifically to look like 40 accidents that the arrangement itself was the message, if you were the kind of officer who could read it. And Teshuk was beginning to suspect unhappily that he was Marshal. He kept his voice level. The salvage field. I'd like a second look before we burn it. Oskvardinaltun. It's debris. I logged it as debris. Teshuk said, I'm asking to check my own work. There was a small silence on the deck, the kind that happens when a junior officer says something that is technically correct and entirely out of line. Oskvar came to Teshuk's station, looked at the plot, at the 40 cold returns, and made the throat click softer this time. You are looking at a graveyard and seeing an ambush, the marshal said, not unkindly. The way you correct a promising subordinate, you intend to keep. This is what caution rots into Teshuk. Ghosts. Classify as debris. Disregard. He said it slowly, the standing order. The way you say a thing to a child, so the child will stop asking. We do not turn a kingship for wreckage. He walked back to the center rail. On the way he passed the spot where Elder Voska had stood, and if he thought of her at all, his face did not show it. Teshuk looked at the 40 ghosts a moment longer. Then he did as he was told, because that was the shape of his life, and he flagged the field for the burn and turned his attention back to the one ship he was allowed to be afraid of. The number was still climbing. The count came steady across the open channel. That calm female voice reading term after term with its little silences in between and behind it. The slow, hard tick that no one on the crest could source. 40 terms. 50. The junior censor officer had stopped trying to guess and had simply started transcribing, and her transcription now filled her screen and had begun to scroll. It hasn't repeated once, sir, she said quietly. Whatever it's counting, it has enough of them to keep going. On the patience, Miriam Okonkwo read the 53rd name and left the silence after it and reached for a cup of coffee that had gone cold 2 names ago. She drank it anyway. Around her, the bridge worked to the tick of the clock, unhurried each station doing the small, competent thing in front of it, and no one told her to slow down, and no one told her to hurry, because everyone aboard understood what the list was, and understood that you did not rush it. Her communications officer, a young man named Reyes, spoke without looking up. They're reading our field, Captain. The ghost screen, sub-commander, over there, dragged the whole thing up and counted it by hand. Good, Okonkwo said. I'd have been disappointed if no one over there could count. He asked to look twice. His marshal told him no. Okonkwo set down the cup. For a moment something passed over her face that was not quite pity and not quite regret. The expression of a person watching another person be told by someone. They trust not to notice the thing that is going to kill them. There's always one who can see it, she said, and there's always someone above him who can't afford to. She looked at the clock on the wall, ticking. Note the time, he asked. I want it in the record. Yes, ma'am. And Reyes. She picked the list back up. Keep the channel open. I want them to hear all of it. 3 jumps away, on a colony that did not yet know what had happened to Meridian Station. A girl named Annabella was setting a place at a table for a father who was not going to come because the message had not reached her, because messages travel at the speed of the couriers that carry them, and grief travels faster than anything else, and had not yet been given the chance. She set out 2 cups. She had grown up in a house where you always set out 2 cups, and she did it now without thinking the way her father wrote her name, at the top of a roster, without thinking a small motion worn smooth by love and repetition. Then she went to the window to watch for a shuttle that had already docked somewhere else, aboard a gray ship, empty of the one man it had been sent to bring home. None of this was in Teshuk's records. He would learn the girl's name much later, and only because the humans made certain that he did. The count reached 60. and kept going. Oskvar had had enough of it. Jam the channel. We can't marshal. The signals officer sounded apologetic and afraid in equal measure. It's on too many bands. It's on all of them. If we jam it, we jam ourselves. Then, explain to me, Oskvar said. And now, there was an edge, under the calm, the first hairline crack in the marshal's certainty, what it is counting. No one answered because no one knew, and the not knowing sat on the deck like a weight. 61, 62, the tick underneath it, patient mechanical, wrong. Teshuk found that he had started counting his own breaths against the number, and made himself stop, and then, on the plot, one of the 40 ghosts moved. It was a small motion at first, the kind a piece of tumbling wreckage makes as it drifts through a gravity gradient. And for one merciful second, Teshuk let himself believe that was all it was. But wreckage tumbles at random. Wreckage does not correct. This contact drifted 3 degrees off its cold ballistic path, held, and then eased itself back onto a new heading, smoothly, deliberately closing the shell a fraction tighter around the crest, and then went still again, and resumed being a piece of debris. Debris does not steer. Teshuk stared at the plot and felt the whole shape of the last hour rearrange itself behind his eyes, the way a word you have said 1,000 times will suddenly, for no reason, look misspelled. The gray ship that waited too calmly, the 40 accidents that were too well arranged to be accidents, the count that would not stop climbing, the old woman who had asked them to turn around and been laughed off the deck. He opened his mouth to say it. He was not sure what he was going to say. Across the open channel, the calm voice read another name, left its silence, and behind it the clock went tick. And one more ghost, that was not a ghost, adjusted its heading by 3 careful degrees. Oskvar's patience broke the way. A strong man's patience breaks all at once, and pointed at the nearest target. Enough ghosts, he said. Enough counting, sub-commander. The gray ship is the source of the transmission. Silence it. 1 volley. Center mass. Teshuk hesitated for exactly as long as he could afford, which was not long. Marshal the field. Is debris, Oskvar said. Fire. There was no arguing with it. The order was clean and lawful, and Teshuk gave it, and the crest's forward batteries, which had been designed to open a moon, spoke. Teshuk watched the volley cross the gap. It was a good shot. He would think about that later in the long quiet, after how it had been a genuinely good shot, laid dead center on a target holding station. No evasion, no shield bloom, nothing to spoil the geometry. The kind of shot they gave to junior gunners as a confidence exercise. It should have gutted the patience from bow to stern. It did not hit the patience. In the last half second before impact, the gray ship simply was not where it had been. There was no lunge, no desperate burn, no flare of overdriven engines. It slid, is the closest Teshuk could later come to describing it, a short, precise translation of a few ship lengths. Unhurried the way a person steps aside from a door that is about to open, and the volley went through the space. The ship had occupied and out into the dark beyond, and the Patience settled onto its new station and went back to waiting, and the calm voice on the channel did not even pause its count. 69, 70. Again, Oskvar said, and there was something in his voice now that had not been there an hour ago. Predictive solution. Fire where it will move, not where it is. They fired where it would move. The gray ship moved somewhere else. They fired a spread to cover the somewhere else. The ship was already past it. It was not faster than the volleys. Teshuk understood, watching the plot, with a cold clarity that was worse than fear. It was earlier than them. Every solution the Crest's gunnery computer generated, the humans had generated 2-1 beats sooner, and had already answered before the answer was needed. The Vharn were fighting a shot behind, and the gap was not closing. It was widening because the human ship was learning the Crest's gunnery as fast as the Crest could show it, filing each pattern the moment it appeared, and never falling for the same geometry twice. They're adapting. Teshuk said to no one to the deck. Every pattern we throw, they've already, Marshal. They are learning us in real time. We cannot lay a solution they haven't already solved. One ship cannot outcompute a kingship. It isn't outcomputing us. And here, Teshuk arrived at the thing that would keep him awake for the rest of a long career. It's out-adapting us. It doesn't need to be smarter than the crest. It only needs to change faster than we can. And it is changing faster than we can. On the patience, this was not experienced as brilliance. It was experienced as work. Okonkwo's gunnery chief, a broad, quiet woman named Adeyemi, called the crest's patterns as they came in the flat shorthand of someone reading a familiar hand, and the helm answered her, and the ship stepped through each incoming solution, the way you step through a puddle. You have crossed 1,000 times without drama, without even much thought, saving the thought for the parts that were new. When a genuinely new pattern came, they took it once, learned it, and never took it again. There was no triumph in it. There was a clock on the wall going tick, and a list still being read, and a great deal to do. They've stopped firing single ships, Captain Adeyemi reported. Marshal, over there's about to commit the flank batteries. He's going to try weight. Let him find out what weight buys him. Okonkwo said. Reyes, are they still counting our field as debris? Reyes checked. Still logging it as debris, ma'am. All 40. He tried to look twice. He got told no. Then the field holds. Nobody move who doesn't have to. Let them keep the word. Let them keep the word. It was Reyes. Thought the whole strategy in 4 syllables. The Vharn had a word debris, and the word was a box. And once a thing was in the box, the Vharn stopped looking at it. And 40 warships had spent the last hour living quite comfortably inside a Vharn word. The humans were not hiding behind stealth or distance. They were hiding behind a habit of thought. They were hiding behind the enemy's own certainty about what was and was not worth seeing. And it was the safest place in the entire volume. Oskvar committed the flank batteries. For 30 seconds, the space between the ships was a wall of fire, and the patience walked through it. And when it cleared, the gray ship was still there, unmarked, waiting, and the calm voice read another name. That was when Oskvar did the thing that told Teshuk how badly the marshal was rattled. He opened a channel of his own human vessel. Oskvar's voice forced back into its command register. You will cease transmission and stand down. You are one ship. Whatever fleet you imagine is coming. It is not here. How many ships do you have in this system? Answer. And I may extend terms. There was a pause. The count did not stop. The calm voice simply read one more name. Finished its silence, and only then did a different voice come onto the channel, older level, unbothered, and Teshuk understood without being told that he was hearing the captain of the gray ship for the first time. How many ships do we have? Okonkwo repeated, as if turning the question over, to see if it was worth the wait. Marshal, that's a strange thing to ask a people who count. Answer the question. You're standing in the answer, she said. You've been standing in it for an hour. You called it debris. A short silence. Not the ritual silence of the list. A different one. I'll give you something better than a number. We're not going to run out before you do. That's not a boast. It's just arithmetic. And we're a people who are very good at arithmetic and very slow to forgive being made to do it. Oskwa quit the channel. His hands folded behind him had tightened until the claws pressed white. On Teshuk's plot, the count of ghosts had quietly revised itself. He had built a routine to track the cold returns properly over the marshal's standing order, filing it under a diagnostic so no one would ask. And the routine had been finding more of them, the ones that sat farther out, colder, more patient contacts the standing order had discarded before they ever reached a human eye. 40 had become more. He watched the tally settle and did the thing he always did. Counted it by hand, to be sure, dragging his claw down, a column that no longer fit on one screen. 206. 206 low, cold, non-standard returns holding a shell around the crest that had been tightening by careful degrees for an hour and a half, while a kingship burned its batteries at the one ship it had been permitted to see. Not debris. Never debris. 206 warships, wearing the Vharn word for garbage, like a cloak, and waiting as their gray sister waited for a shuttle that had already come home, and a list that was almost finished, being read. Teshuk did not report the number. He was not sure in that moment that reporting it would do anything but get him relieved, and he had begun to understand that he was the only officer on the deck still looking at the truth, and that this was a responsibility he could not hand up the chain, because the chain had already twice told him to stop. The calm female voice returned to the channel, resuming the list where the captain had left it. Name after name after name, and the count that had paused now climbed again. Steady, patient, no end in sight. And then for the first time in 90 minutes, it stopped. The voice read one more name. It left the silence, and it did not go on. The number which had climbed without rest since the clock started simply held, and the holding was louder than any siren because a thing that counts and then stops as everyone on the deck suddenly understood finished counting. Into that silence, the calm voice read one name by itself slowly, and with a weight the others had not carried, spacing the sounds so that even a Vharn translator could not blunt them. Dr. Thomas Vela. And then very quietly the clock on the Warship kept ticking, and the number stayed exactly where it was, and Teshuk sat in the ringing quiet of 206 warships. He was not allowed to see, and understood that the counting had never been a countdown at all. For a long moment, no one on the command deck of the Crest said anything at all. The number held 206, though. Only Teshuk knew that figure, sitting behind his eyes, like a stone. The name hung in the air. Dr. Thomas Vela, meaningless to every Vharn on the deck, and somehow, for that very reason, worse, because a people who would stop a war to say one name that clearly, and one time only, were not doing it for effect. They were doing it because the name mattered to them. And a thing that matters to an enemy is the most dangerous object in any system, because it is the thing they will not trade away. Oskvar recovered first, because that was his function. It is a bluff. 200 ghosts. 300. It changes nothing. They are cold, powered down. If they had teeth, they would have shown them an hour ago, instead of reading us a roll of their dead. They read us the roll of their dead, Teshuk said slowly, because they wanted us to hear how many there were before they did anything about it. He had stopped hiding the routine. He put the full plot on the main display, all of it, over the standing order, over the marshal, and the deck lighting, dimmed again to hold the count. And this time, it was not 40 ghosts. The shell around the crest resolved out of the dark in a slow wave, as the passive returns were finally belatedly allowed to mean what they were. Cold hulls, non-standard construction, mismatched plate, repaired too many times, by too many hands, 206 of them. And as the deck watched in a silence that had gone from contempt to something with no name, the number kept resolving because there were more behind those colder and farther and more patient still contacts the standing order had thrown away before any eye had touched them. Teshuk counted the new ones by hand because he did not know how to stop doing it. The tally climbed past 200, past 400, past 6, 844. 844 warships, holding a shell that had been closing around the crest by patient degrees since before the first shot was fired. Every one of them logged by Teshuk's own hand in the first hour under a single word. Debris, Teshuk said. He heard himself laugh once a sound, with nothing in it. We classified them as debris. Marshal, we have been sitting inside a closed fist for 2 hours, and we told ourselves it was a graveyard, because that is what the order said to call it. And the order was mine. Oskvar stared at the plot. Whatever he had built his certainty, out of over 40 years of command, was coming apart on the display, in front of his deck. Silently, the way certainty always comes apart not with an argument, but with a fact that will not go back in the box. 844 boxes, all of them open, now, all of them full, and not one of them was firing. That was the part Oskvar could not make fit, and Teshuk watched him fail to make it fit. 844 warships, with a clean shot at a single kingship, a shell so tight that a coordinated volley would have ended the crest before the first alarm finished sounding, and they were not firing. They were holding, they were waiting with the same flat patience. The gray ship had shown from the first minute the patience of people who have already decided how the hour ends, and are only letting you catch up. Why haven't they fired? Oskvar said. It was not a command, it was the first honest question the marshal had asked all day. The channel answered him, the older voice, the captain of the gray ship level, and unhurried. Because we're not you, Okonkwo said. On the patience, Miriam Okonkwo stood for the first time in 2 hours and crossed to the wall where the clock ticked and put one hand flat against the casing, not to stop it, just to feel it go. Behind her, the bridge waited 844 ships. Waited, and she took the moment she needed, because she had earned it, and because the thing she was about to do required that she be certain, and she was. "Marshal," she said into the channel, "you struck Meridian Station 1 rotation ago. You logged it as a soft military asset. It was a hospital. The names you've been listening to for the last 2 hours are the people who were on it. Doctors. The last one was the man who built the place. He had a daughter. She's setting a table tonight for someone who isn't coming. And she doesn't know yet because we haven't been able to reach her. Because we've been out here with you." The channel was silent. Even the clock for once seemed quiet. "You had a clean shot at everything we love, and you took it because you decided it wasn't worth seeing." Okonkwo said, "We have had a clean shot at your ship for 2 hours. 844 clean shots, Marshal. And you're still talking." She looked back at her bridge, at Adiemi, at Reyes, at the clock. "You chose to kill our doctors," she said. "We're about to choose something else. I want you to watch us do it, so you understand it was a choice." And then for the first time the shell moved, not to fire. Teshuk saw it, and his blood went cold. And then, a half-second later, went cold, in a different and stranger way, because the 844 cold hulls were not lining up a firing solution. They were closing, tightening, coming out of the dark and into the light of the crest's own running lamps, letting themselves be seen at last, hull after mismatched hull resolving into hard reality, all around the kingship near enough. Now that Teshuk could read the repair, seems the patched plate, the names stenciled on their flanks in a soft human alphabet, near enough that there was no longer any question of the crest fighting its way clear of them. They surrounded the kingship completely, and they held their fire. The 844 ships held their fire, and instead they took the crest apart without firing a shot. It was the most disciplined thing Teshuk had ever watched, and the most frightening precisely because there was nothing in it to fear in the ordinary way. No barrage, no boarding, no death. The human ships moved in a slow closing choreography that his gunnery board could not even flag as hostile, because none of it crossed the line. His board understood as an attack. They matched the crest's velocity. They folded in around its drive section and its weapon arcs and its communication array, each ship taking a station so exact that the kingship's own systems began one by one to report themselves unable to acquire a clear line, unable to open a firing lane, unable to reach the wider Vharn network, not because anything had been destroyed, but because everything had been surrounded so completely and so gently that the crest was now a fist closed inside a larger, calmer hand. The main batteries reported no target solution. There was no open space to fire into. Every arc terminated in a human hull holding station a few hundred meters off, close enough that firing would have been suicide and pointless. Both and the human hulls simply sat there unarmed, as far as the crest could tell, being in the way, being patient, being impossible to shoot without the crest tearing itself open on the recoil. "They're not attacking," the junior sensor officer whispered. "Sir, nothing's attacking." "Why does it feel like we've already lost?" "Because we have," Teshuk said. He watched the crest's tactical picture go dark, not with damage but with irrelevance. One capability after another quietly retired, not killed. Retired the way you take a tool out of a child's hand. And he understood that this was the flex, that this was the whole of it. The humans were showing the Vharn with enormous care that they could have done anything and were choosing to do almost nothing, and that the almost nothing was the message. They could have opened the crest, like the crest had opened Meridian. They had the shot. 844 times over, they had the shot, and they were spending all of it, every last scrap of that overwhelming and patiently assembled advantage, on the single act of not taking it. Okonkwo's voice came onto the channel one more time, and now it was not addressed to Oskvar alone, but to the whole deck wide, and open the way you speak when you want to be heard, rather than understood. "Your crews go home," she said. The words landed on the deck, and no one moved. "Every ship in your kingship, every soul aboard goes home. We are opening a corridor. Your drive section is untouched. Your life support is untouched. You will not be pursued. You will make your jump, and you will carry what happened here back to whoever sent you, and you will tell them exactly what it was, because we did not do it quietly, and we did not do it for you." A pause. "The clock ticked. You chose to kill our doctors," Okonkwo said, and her voice did not rise, and that was the terrible part, that it did not rise. "We chose to let your crews go home. I need you to hear that those are not the same choice. You will be tempted when you are safe to call this weakness. Some of you will need to call it that to sleep. But you were in a closed fist for 2 hours, and you are alive. And the only reason you are alive is that we are the kind of people who count our dead before we decide what to do. And having counted them, we decided this. Remember that we could have decided otherwise. Remember that we chose. Now go home." The corridor opened. On Teshuk's plot, the shell of human ships peeled back along one vector. Cleanly, deliberately, a lane of empty space laid open toward the crest's best jump line. An escape route gift-wrapped by the enemy, who did not need to give it. Oskvar stood at the center rail and looked at the open lane and did not order the jump. Teshuk understood why. To take the corridor was to accept in front of his own deck that it had been given that the kingship of the Vharn ascendancy was leaving a system alive by the mercy of a people it had called scrap 2 hours ago. Every year of Oskvar's certainty stood between the marshal and that lane. Teshuk watched the old commander fail to cross it, watched pride do to Oskvar exactly what pride is for, which is to make a strong creature stand still in an open doorway while the building burns. And Teshuk realized that if he waited for the marshal, he would wait forever. So Teshuk gave the order himself. "Helm, take the corridor. Make the jump line. Now." And when the helm officer hesitated, looking to the marshal, Teshuk said it again and put into it something he had never put into an order in his life, which was the plain nakedness of a person who has stopped caring what it costs him. "Every soul on this ship goes home, because they are letting us. I will not throw that away, because we are ashamed to take it. Helm, now." The crest moved. It slid down the open lane, between the silent human hulls, past hull, after mismatched hull, past the stenciled soft alphabet names, past 844 warships that had held a clean shot for 2 hours, and spent every bit of it on restraint, and not one of them fired, and not one of them so much as tracked the kingship as it passed, because tracking would have been a threat, and the humans were done making threats. They had made their point. The point was walking out of the system alive, and in the ringing quiet of the retreat as the jump line came up, and the stars began to smear. Oskvar spoke low, meant for no. Log meant maybe for no one. "Why are we alive?" the marshal said. Teshuk did not answer him, because the humans already had, and because out on the open channel faint beneath the tick of a clock that had not stopped the calm voice, had begun quietly to read the list of names again from the beginning for anyone still listening who had not yet understood what the counting was for. "Empires do not fall the way. Trees fall. A tree gives warning. It groans. It leans the roots tear one at a time. And there is a moment, if you are watching, when you know empires fall the way. Certainty falls, which is all at once, from the inside, in a single quiet instant, when a thing that everyone knew turns out to have been a thing that everyone only agreed to say. The Vharn ascendancy did not fall in the system where it met the humans. It fell 3 weeks later in a council chamber. In the time it took one old woman to be proven right, but that was later. First, there was the jump, and the long dark after it, and Sub-Commander Teshuk, sitting at his station on a kingship, full of survivors who did not yet understand what they had survived. He had kept the recording, all of it, every band, the calm female voice, and the names, and the tick of the clock underneath. He told himself it was for the after-action report. In truth, he could not stop listening to it, and somewhere, in the 3rd or 4th pass alone on a quiet deck, in the middle of a jump, he finally heard the thing he had been failing to hear for 2 hours. He had assumed, like everyone on the deck, that the count was a countdown, a weapon charging, a number climbing towards some threshold that, once reached, would be discharged at the crest. It was the only shape the Vharn had for a rising number in the middle of a battle. A thing that counts up is counting towards something, and the something is always a release. but the number had reached its top, and nothing had been released. The count had simply stopped, and one name had been read alone, and then the human ships had closed, and opened their fist, and let the crest go. There was no discharge. There was no threshold. He ran the recording again, and made his translator lay the terms out, flat stripped of his own assumptions, and looked at them as what they were rather than as what he had been afraid they were. They were names. Every term in the count was a name. The number had not been climbing toward a weapon. It had been climbing because there were that many of them, because the humans had lost that many people on Meridian Station, and had decided before they did anything else to say each of them out loud, once in front of the enemy who had killed them, so that the killing could not be a number on a report. The count was not a countdown. It was a roll of the dead. And the reason it had felt like a weapon charging, the reason every officer on the deck had heard menace in it, was that it had been a weapon charging, only not the kind the Vharn understood. What had been building term by term across 2 hours was not energy. It was the case. The humans had been assembling in the open, in the enemy's own hearing, the complete and unarguable reason for everything they were about to do. And then they had done a fraction of it, and the fraction had been mercy, and the restraint had landed harder than any barrage, because the whole 2-hour count stood behind it, saying this is what we could have answered, and did not. Teshuk sat with that for a long time. Then he did the thing that ended his usefulness to the ascendancy, and began his usefulness to history. He wrote it down, not the sanitized report. The marshal would file the one that would call the engagement an inconclusive contact with an irregular human formation, and recommend increased patrol density along the Meridian Lane. Teshuk wrote the other report, the true one, the one that said we called 844 warships debris, because our standing order told us to, and they let us keep the word, because it was the safest cage they could have, built for us, and it was made entirely out of our own certainty. He wrote that the humans' power was not a weapon they were hiding. It was that they built faster than the ascendancy could destroy, and adapted faster than the ascendancy could plan. And worst of all, that they kept count. He wrote a line he did not fully understand when he wrote it, and understood completely by the time anyone read it. Species that keep counting their dead are very difficult to stop. He did not mean it as poetry. He meant it as a threat assessment. A people who tally every loss and carry the tally forward will never write off a wrong, as the cost of doing business will never let a number become a rounding error. Will never stop, because stopping would mean leaving a name uncounted. They have organized their entire civilization around the refusal to do that. You cannot exhaust such a people. You cannot outlast them. You cannot even really frighten them, because fear works by making a cost feel unbearable. And a species that has already decided to bear every cost, and to name it, has taken that lever out of your hands. The humans had not shown the Vharn a bigger fleet. They had shown the Vharn a bigger patience. And patience, Teshuk now understood, was the one resource the ascendancy had never learned to manufacture. The report went up the chain. Oskvar buried it. Of course, Oskvar buried it because to forward it was to sign his own name to the sentence that the kingship had lived by the enemy's mercy, and Oskvar would sooner have died in that system than admit he had been let live in it. He filed his inconclusive contact and his increased patrol density, and he told himself, the way the losing side always tells itself, that the matter was closed. It was Elder Vaska who opened it. She had asked the deck to turn around, and been laughed at and left, and said only you will remember that I asked. She had meant it as the last card an old officer has to play, the card that costs nothing in the moment and everything later. And later came, when the crest limped home with survivors who could not quite explain why they were survivors. Vaska went quietly to each of them, not to the marshal, to the crew, to the junior sensor officer and the signals officer, and finally to Teshuk. She asked them one question, which was, "What did you hear?" And she listened to the answers with the patience of a woman who had heard something like them once before in the war. The Vharn no longer named, and had spent 40 years being told she had imagined it. Teshuk gave her the recording and the real report both. 3 weeks after the system, the High Council of the Vharn Ascendancy convened to ratify the marshal's account and formalize the increased patrol density along the Meridian Lane. And Elder Vaska rose uninvited and played 11 seconds of a recording. A calm, female voice, reading a name, leaving a silence, reading another. Under it, a slow, hard tick. This is the weapon that defeated a kingship. Vaska said, "Counselors, I want you to hear it, because you are about to vote to send more ships to meet it. And I want it on the record that you heard exactly what it is before you did. It is a list of the people we killed, read to us once by the people who then chose not to kill us. Every commander who has faced the humans has come home with the same story, and we have buried every one of them under words like inconclusive and irregular, because the truth does not fit in our reports. The truth is that we struck a hospital, and the people who owned that hospital surrounded us completely and counted their dead in our hearing, and let us go, so that we would have to carry this recording into this room and make you listen to it. They did not want our ships. They wanted this vote. They wanted us in this chamber, choosing what to do next, knowing what we know. That is the weapon. It is already inside the room. The council did what councils do. It argued. There were those who called it weakness, exactly as Okonkwo had predicted, because some of them needed to sleep. There were those who called for a larger fleet, and Vaska let them speak. And when they were done, she asked them a single question, the one Teshuk's report had put in her hands. "How large a fleet," she said, "do you send against a people who count?" No one had an answer because there was no answer, because the humans had built a thing that did not care about the size of the fleet you sent that would meet 40 ships or 4,000, with the same flat patience and the same rising list, that could not be exhausted, because it had already decided to bear any cost and name it. And a people like that does not lose wars in the way the Vharn understood losing. It simply eventually wins at whatever price, and writes the price down, and carries it forward, and comes again. The Ascendancy did not send the larger fleet. It sent instead a delegation and terms and reparations for a hospital. It had called a soft military asset, and it was in the drafting of those terms that the Empire fell quietly from the inside. In the moment the Council agreed to write the name of Meridian Station into a formal apology, and thereby admitted on the record forever that the thing it had destroyed had been worth counting after all. Certainty does not survive that admission. The Ascendancy went on existing for a long time afterward, the way a tree goes on standing for a while after the roots have torn, but it had fallen in the chamber all at once. In the time it took one old woman to be proven right, and everyone who was in the room knew it, and none of them ever said so, because the humans had already said it for them in a calm voice, over an open channel reading a list. Far away on the patience, Miriam Okonkwo reached up and at last stopped the clock. The clock stopped, and the bridge of the patience was for a moment the quietest place in the galaxy. They had all worked to that sound for 2 hours, and some of them for years, and its absence was a physical thing, a hole in the air. No one filled it right away. Adeyemi sat back from her gunnery board and looked at her hands. Reyes closed the open channel. He had held open the whole time, and the little indicator light went dark. Okonkwo stood with her palm still resting against the casing of the old mechanical clock, the one a chief engineer, 3 captains ago, had carried up from a farmhouse on Earth, and she let the quiet be quiet for as long as it needed to be, which was not long because there was work. There is always work, and the work is what you go back to. "Get me a real channel to the Vela colony," she said. "A private one, not the wideband. Someone has to reach the daughter before the news does, and it is going to be one of us, and it is going to be a person, and not a message." "I'll raise them," Captain Reyes said. "No," Okonkwo said. "I'll do it. Put it through to my quarters." She took her hand off the clock. Some things you don't hand to a junior officer. She went aft to make the hardest call of a long career, and the bridge let her go, and turned back to the ordinary business of a ship that had just won something too large to feel, which is to say they checked the drive and logged the engagement, and started the slow work of turning 844 scattered ships back into a fleet, with somewhere to be. 3 jumps away on the colony, Anna Vela was still setting a table. She had set it every night for 11 days, 2 cups, out of the habit her father had put in her, the way he put his own habits in everything, and she had gone to the window every night to watch for a shuttle, and every night the shuttle had not come, and she had told herself the things you tell yourself. Delays. The lanes were bad. He was needed on the station. One more rotation. He was always needed one more rotation. It was the most predictable thing about him, and the thing she loved most, and resented most in equal measure. She was at the window when the call came. She was expecting at most a message. She got a voice. Instead, an older woman's voice, calm and careful and unhurried, that said her name first, and then said it was going to tell her something true, and that it was sorry, and that it was not going to rush. What was said between them belongs to them, but it is worth knowing that a starship captain who had faced a kingship without her pulse changing spent 40 minutes on that call and did not once look at the time, and that when it was over she sat alone in her quarters for a while before she came back to the bridge, and that no one asked her about it, because they were the kind of crew that knew when not to ask. She had told the Vharn that Anna was setting a table for someone who wasn't coming, and that Anna didn't know yet. Now Anna knew. It was the one part of the whole engagement Okonkwo could not make come out clean, because there is no clean version, because the mercy she had shown the enemy and the grief she had just handed a girl at a window were both in the end the same arithmetic. You count the dead, you say the names, you reach the living before the news does, and then you go back to work, because the work is the only answer to any of it that does not make things worse. On the crest, on the long voyage home, that would end in a council chamber, and the quiet fall of an empire, Sub-Commander Tashuk was writing. He had a report to file, the true one, the one Vasco would eventually carry into the High Council and use to break the certainty of a civilization, but that was not what he was writing now. Now, he was writing the after-action log for his own station, the routine record, the kind of thing no one ever reads, and he came to the field on the form where he was required to classify the contacts encountered in the engagement, and he stopped. Debris, that was the word. It was the correct word by every standing order the Ascendancy had. Low signal, non-standard construction, no announced allegiance, classify as debris, disregard. He had typed it 1,000 times. His claw hovered over it now and would not descend, because he had learned at some cost exactly what the word had cost, and he found that he could not make himself put it in the box one more time. He deleted the field. In its place, he wrote the true classification, the one that did not exist in any Vharn manual, and that he invented in that moment for a form no one would read. Warships, 844. Saying too late, it changed nothing. The engagement was over. The empire was already falling. The form would be filed and buried and forgotten. But Teshuk sat looking at the words he had written, the plain, honest words, and understood that this was the only part of the whole affair that was his, the one small refusal that belonged to him alone, and that a career of certainty had ended. And something quieter and more honest had started in the space where the clock used to tick. Back on the Patience, the last shuttle of the day came in. It was not the one that mattered. The one that had mattered had docked hours ago in the middle of a battle carrying a medical crew that had gotten off Meridian Station before the end, because Dr. Thomas Vela had stayed behind to make sure they did. This one was ordinary, a routine crew rotation, the next shift, coming up to relieve the last, and it crossed the small distance and docked and sealed, and the gray ship swallowed it the way it had swallowed the other without ceremony, and a tired crew came aboard, and a tired crew went off, and that was all. Okonkwo came back to the bridge, in time to watch it dock. She stood at the window where hours ago a kingship had filled the glass, and now there was only the ordinary dark and the ordinary lights of her own ships, and the small bright shape of a shuttle coming home. Reyes glanced at her and did not ask, and she did not offer, and after a moment she picked up the cold cup of coffee she had set down at the start of all this, the one from 2 hours and a lifetime ago, and she drank it because it was there, and because she was thirsty, and because the small, ordinary things are what you have. Log us out of the system, she said. Set course for home. And Reyes, she looked at the stopped clock on the wall, and the quiet where the tick used to be. Wind it up again in the morning, not tonight. Let it be quiet tonight. Yes, Captain. The Patience turned for home, and the fleet turned with it 844 ships that an empire had called scrap, moving off into the dark without hurry the way people go home. After a long day, having done a hard thing, carefully, and named the cost, and reached the living, and gone back to work. Behind them the system emptied. The clock for the night was still, and somewhere on a colony, 3 jumps away, a girl put away one of the 2 cups, and kept the other, and set it out again, the next night, and the night after that, the way her father had taught her, because some counts you never stop, and that is the whole of it, and that is what they are.